Well, I'm going to go ahead and get right into my teaching, and then we'll do some prayer and such afterward, toward the end of the evening. You can take your Bibles and open them to Matthew chapter 21. So what I'm going to be teaching on tonight is this word kairos, and it's from Seasons. I was studying, and it really stood out to me, this word kairos. It caught my attention, and I just knew it was something that I wanted to share the more that I looked into it. Kairos is the Greek word for season. It is also time, but we're just going to look at season tonight. There's plenty. I don't even have time to cover all of it. But in the critical Greek lexicon, I'll tell you what it says. In the critical Greek lexicon on page 672, under season, this word kairos, the right measure and relation as regards time and place, hence the right time, suitable or convenient time, the opportune point of time at which a thing should be done, and definite portion of time. So to shorten that, a limited, definite portion of time, and we're looking at in the purpose of God. Now, when you think about season as portions of time, you might think of seasons of life, seasons of growth, seasons of weather, seasons for the garden, seasons of learning. There's so many things we think about when we think about seasons. And this word kairos that we're going to look into, I just think it was very wonderful to see the power of God and the definition and the ability of God in this study. So this word is different from seasons, which is oikonomia, because that's a literal dispensation or administration. There's a definite beginning and definite end. That's not the word we're looking at tonight. So you're in Matthew chapter 21, and we're going to begin in verse 41. But I'm going to read actually starting from verse 34, just to get a little background of this. And when the time, kairos, of the fruit drew near, he sent the servants to the husbandmen, and that they might receive the fruits of it. And the husbandman took his servants and beat one, and killed another, and stoned another. Again he sent other servants, more than the first, and they did unto them likewise. But last of all he sent unto them his son, saying, they will surely reverence my son. Maybe there was some misunderstanding. But when the husbandmen saw the son, they said among themselves, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him, and let us seize on his inheritance. And they caught him, and cast him out of the vineyard, and slew him. When the Lord therefore of the vineyard cometh, what will he do unto these husbandmen? They say unto him, he will miserably destroy these wicked men, and will let out his vineyard unto other husbandmen, which shall render him the fruits in their seasons. So in this first passage, we have that word kairos twice, once used as time and once used as seasons. But the thing about this is there is a season that things ripen, they're ready. There's a definite season that things are ready to be harvested. It's not that it wasn't ready. They just didn't want to give it up. And it was his inheritance. So kairos used here twice. The season was there. It was the season of being able to share of the profit of that vineyard. They just were not willing to do it. Let's look at Matthew 24. In Matthew chapter 24, we'll begin in verse 42. Our word kairos is in verse 45. Watch therefore, verse 42, for ye know not what hour your Lord doth come. But know this, that if the goodman of the house had known in what watch the thief would come, he would have watched and would not have suffered his house to be broken up. Therefore be ye also ready, for in such an hour as ye think not the Son of Man cometh. Who then is faithful and wise servant, whom his Lord hath made ruler over his household, to give them meat in due season. Blessed is that servant. In this passage here, in due season is our word kairos, and it's talking about being watchful as a faithful servant of God over his house. And given the right spiritual appointed time here, it says when you're watchful and when you're, what we just read, it completed this passage with that person will be blessed. Blessed is that servant in verse 46. Blessed is that servant, being watchful as a faithful servant in due season. And we're gonna get more into that. So go to Mark chapter 12. My shadow is blocking my light. Mark chapter 12. So many adjustments tonight, but it's all good. Mark chapter 12. And we're going to look at verses 1 and 2 at our word kairos. Mark chapter 12, verse 1. And he began to speak unto them by parables. A certain man planted a vineyard, and set an hedge about it, and digged a place for the wine vat, and built a tower, and let it out to husbandmen, and went into a far country. And at the season, kairos, he sent to the husbandmen a servant, that he might receive from the husbandmen of the fruit of the vineyard. So here we are again, this season, and we'll see later why I'm reading Matthew and Mark, and then we're going to look at Luke too. But I'm going to read you the footnote here in Mark chapter 12 in my companion Bible. At the season here is the 4th year after planting it. There's no profit until then. So it is known that after the 4th year of planting something, that's when you're going to get the profit. That was at the season specifically. Let's look at Luke chapter 1. So in that record that we read about the vineyard, was the harvest, the people that were working the vineyard, was it theirs to keep? It wasn't theirs to keep. But they did not want to give it up. There is a season. We're going to look at verse 20 here, but I'm actually going to start in verse 1. We're going to look at kairos, in their season, because this is a wonderful record. Luke chapter 1. For as much as many have taken in hand to set forth in order a declaration of those things which are most assuredly believed among us, even as they delivered them unto us, which from the beginning were eyewitnesses and ministers of the word, it seems good to me also, having had perfect understanding of all things from the very first, to write unto thee in order, most excellent Theophilus, that thou mightest know the certainty of those things wherein thou hast been instructed. There was in the days of Herod, the king of Judea, a certain priest named Zacharias of the course of Abiah, and his wife was of the daughters of Aaron, and her name was Elizabeth. And you guys probably know the record that we're going to be getting into. But the angel Gabriel came to Zacharias at his time of prayer in the synagogue and told him that him and his wife were going to have a child. He told them their prayers were going to be answered. And this is leading up to the scripture I'm going to get to. He told them that it was going to happen. But because of his unbelief that it could happen at his old age, he was made unable to speak until it was fulfilled. But look at this in verse 25. Thus hath the Lord dealt with me in the days wherein he looked on me to take away my reproach among men. And in the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent from God unto a city of Galilee named Nazareth. Oops, I went too far ahead. Sorry about that. Okay, so verse 22. Sorry, I jumped way far ahead. And when he came out, he could not speak unto them. And they perceived that he had seen a vision in the temple. For he beckoned unto them and remained speechless. And it came to pass that as soon as the days of his ministration were accomplished, he departed to his own house. So it's telling you here that what the angel told him was going to happen, happened. If you look up back in verse 20, when the angel told him, you're going to be dumb, you're not going to be able to speak these things until everything's fulfilled in their season. And in their season is our word kairos in verse 20. And then it goes on to tell that it was fulfilled. But he could not speak because, have you ever heard that, have you ever heard that saying, if you can't say anything good, then don't speak at all? That's what it makes me think of when I'm reading this record, because negative words and words of unbelief can really affect situations. You know, it affects your own thinking mostly, but it affects situations. And I found it interesting that he was dumb and couldn't speak, but in the right season, everything happened just as it was supposed to, in the season, in the appointed time. God's timing, as we know, is impeccable. He's never late. He's never wrong. He's never too early. He never misses the mark. God's timing is impeccable. So really, rather than trying to fight it or change it, just embrace it. Like, God's timing is impeccable. Embrace it and see what it is that you can learn from or grow or give, or whatever the situation might be, whatever that season is. Let's look at Luke 4:13. I'm kind of rushing through the first few because I want to make sure I get to the last few. And I know my teaching was a little bit long. So Luke 4, and we're going to look at verse 13. And when the devil had ended all the temptation, he departed from him for a season. Now, this is when Jesus was being tempted for a season. Leading up to verse 13, the devil tempted Jesus. Jesus resisted, and he replied, "This is what my Father has to say about that." The devil ended the temptation and departed for a season, kairos, not forever, for a season. But he did return again and again, repeatedly. The temptations were just in different order and under different circumstances. I have a note here I want to read. Verse 13. Okay, here it is. So for a season here, it's talking about he departed for a season until a convenient time, returning, like I said, again and again, repeating the 3 temptations in a different order and under different circumstances. So the resistance has to be a continual thing, just like it was for Jesus. We can resist, the devil has to flee for a season, but then we might have to resist again in another season, and the devil has to flee. in my companion Bible, in Appendix 116, it talks about the temptations of the Lord and how they're, and is handled in much greater depth. I found it pretty compelling, but I don't have time to really get deeply into all of that. But it compared Matthew and Luke, like what we read, the seasons of tempting and the departing for a season, and showed the difference in the two records in how it was another temptation in a different, in a different order and a different form. So, like I said, you resist, the devil flees, for a season, but we have to continue that mannerism in our life to resist the devil. Let's look at Luke chapter 12. I know I'm rushing through this first part, so I hope I'm being clear on stuff. Okay, Luke chapter 12. Our word is in 42, but we're going to begin in verse 37. Blessed are the servants whom the Lord, when he cometh, shall find watching. Verily I say unto you, that he shall gird himself, and make them to sit down to meat, and will come forth and serve them. And if he shall come in the second watch, or come in the third watch, and find them so, blessed are those servants. And this know, that if the good man of the house had known what hour the thief would come, he would have watched, and not have suffered his house to be broken through. Be ye therefore ready also, for the Son of Man cometh at an hour when ye think not. Then Peter said unto him, Lord, speakest thou this parable unto us, or even to all? And the Lord said in verse 42, Who then is that faithful and wise steward, who his Lord shall make ruler over this household, to give their portion of meat in due season? Kairos. Blessed is that servant. Interesting how in verse 37, watching, in verse 38, watch, in verse 39, watched, in verse 40, be therefore ready. In verse 42, we begin to see attributes of a faithful and wise steward. That's what the Lord said, a faithful and wise steward. So a faithful and wise steward is continually watching. I found that interesting that it was used 3 times just in those few verses. And will be blessed. That person will be blessed. And we receive in the season, in the proper season. In verse 1 there, in Luke chapter 12, let me go back to verse 1. In verse 1, it says, In the meantime, when there were gathered together an innumerable multitude of people, insomuch that they trode one upon another, he began to say unto his disciples, First of all, beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. That word in the meantime, you probably all are familiar with it, the Greek N-E-N. It's to be or remain within, with the primary idea of rest and continuance regarding the place and the space and the sphere of influence that is involved. Also, by the force or instrument emanating from within. Let's look at Acts chapter 1, and you'll see why I even bothered to mention that pretty soon. Acts chapter 1. We're going to start here, and we're just going to read verse 7 here in Acts chapter 1. Verse 7 says, And he said unto them, It is not for you to know the times or the seasons, Kairos, which the Father hath put in his own power, but ye shall receive power. So he's telling them, you don't need to know the exact time, the time and the season that things are going to happen, But you will have power. In the meantime, you will have power. And the reason I brought up in is because he's telling them, you know, even though you don't need to know all the things that are going on exactly when, you will have power. Just be in the season that you're in. Just be in that and function in the season that you're in. You don't need to know everything about everything. Acts chapter 13. And that was a big deal. So, I mean, we think we have big deals we need to know everything about. Acts chapter 13. We're going to look at the Kairos again for a season, but I'm going to give you a little bit of the backstory here. There were prophets and teachers doing the Lord's work. Then in a certain place, they found a certain sorcerer, a false prophet, a Jew named Bar-Jesus. He was with Sergius Paulus, who was the deputy of the country. He was an influential man and a prudent man. He called for Barnabas and Saul because he wanted to hear the word of God. But the sorcerer, Elymas, stood against them and was trying to keep the deputy from the faith. So this is what's leading up to our word here. We're going to pick it up in verse 9. Yeah, one page. 13, verse 9. Then Saul, who also is called Paul, filled with the Holy Ghost, set his eyes on him and said, "O full of all subtlety," and it's the sorcerer he's setting his eyes on. "O full of all subtlety and all mischief, thou child of the devil, thou enemy of all righteousness, wilt thou not cease to pervert the right ways of the Lord? And now behold, the hand of the Lord is upon thee, and thou shalt be blind, not seeing the sun for a season," Kairos. And immediately there fell on him a mist and a darkness, and he went about seeking some to lead him by the hand. Then the deputy, when he saw what was done, believed, being astonished at the doctrine of the Lord. What I find incredible about this record is that there is no length that God won't go to win and to protect his people. Nothing can thwart his purposes. This season, this was a time for this man to be able to believe and come to the Lord. And that sorcerer, that season was a time for him to be blind and not to be able to do his dirty work, so that this person could come to the Lord. I love that, how loudly it shows God's ability and willingness, and that nothing can thwart his purposes. Nothing. Let's go to Acts chapter 14, one page over. Acts chapter 14. And we're going to begin in verse 11 to get our running start on this record. And when the people saw that what Paul had done, they lifted up their voices, saying, and he had healed. They lifted up their voices, saying, in the speech of Laconia, "The gods are come down to us in the likeness of man." And they called Barnabas Jupiter and Paul Mercurius, because he was the chief speaker. Then the priest of Jupiter, which was before their city, brought oxen and garlands unto the gates, and would have done sacrifice with the people, which when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard of, they rent their clothes and ran in among the people, crying out and saying, "Sirs, why do ye these things? We also are men of like passions with you, and preach unto you that ye should turn from these vanities unto the living God, which made heaven and earth and the sea and all things that are therein, who in times past suffered all nations to walk in their own ways. Nevertheless, he left not himself without witness, in that he did good, and gave us rain from heaven and fruitful seasons, kairos, filling our hearts with food and gladness. Wow. Filling our hearts with food and gladness. Here's our fruitful seasons, talking about the Lord and how he left himself. He didn't leave himself without witness. He gave rain from heaven and fruitful seasons. And we're going to look a little bit more at this because that word, fruitful seasons, kairos, that is definite fruit-bearing portions of time in the purpose of God. I think that's wonderful to think about. Definite fruit-bearing portions of time in the purpose of God. And what are they doing? They're filling our hearts. That word filling is impeccable, which is satisfying. It's actually considered a medical word. And filling our hearts, I'm going to read something to you from the lexicon here. Page 362. So in this, I'll read to you what the critical lexicon says about that word heart. It says, as a corporeal organ of the body, it is the seat of life, which chiefly and finally participates in all its movements. Also as the seat and center of man's personal life, in which the distinctive character of the human manifests itself. Hence, the significance of the heart as the starting point of the developments and manifestations of personal life, as well as the organ of their concentration and outgo. What an awesome definition of the heart. Wow. And this is talking about these fruitful seasons, kairos, these definite portions of time full of bearing fruit will fill our hearts so full. And it means to fill in, to fill up, make quite full, satiate. There's no room left to put anything else. So full with food and gladness. So there's nothing, absolutely nothing lacking in those fruitful seasons. Let's look at Galatians chapter 6. In Galatians chapter 6, our word is in verse 9, but we're going to begin in verse 8. For he that soweth to his flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap life everlasting. And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season, kairos, we shall reap if we faint not. As we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all, especially unto them who are of the household of faith. In due season, we shall reap. And we just read that there are those fruit-bearing seasons. There's times to sow and there's times to reap in life, aren't there? Let's go to 1 Thessalonians. First Thessalonians chapter 5. And we're going to read verses 1 through 9. But of the times and the seasons, kairos, brethren, ye have no need that I write unto you, for yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travaileth upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. If you think about that, as travaileth upon a woman with child knows the season's coming, but yet when that day is there, it's still a surprise. It still takes you. It's interesting to think about that. But ye, brethren, are not in darkness, that that day should overtake you as a thief. And verse 5 now. Ye are all the children of light and the children of the day. We are not of the night, nor of darkness. Therefore let us not sleep, as do others, but let us watch and be sober. And there's our word watch again, connected with these seasons. For they that sleep, sleep in the night, and they that be drunken are drunken in the night. But let us, who are of the day, be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love, and for an helmet, the hope of salvation. This passage is so wonderful because I want to look a little deeper into this, because when I was reading and saw putting on the breastplate of faith and love, I don't remember ever reading the breastplate of faith and love before. I only ever remember reading the breastplate of righteousness. And so within this passage, it's interesting that it refers back to another passage with that in it, and we're going to get there in a little bit. But our word kairos here, again, being watchful and sober, it's talking about in seasons of life. There's very particular seasons of life. Okay, so what and how do we do that? How do we do that? All right, in verse 8, it says, by putting on the breastplate of faith and love, and for an helmet, the hope of salvation. Keep your finger here, because we are going to come back, but now we're going to go to Ephesians chapter 6 for our comparison record. I found this fascinating in my companion Bible. Some of the research and the notes that have already been done that I got to delve into. It's just very, very exciting. In Ephesians chapter 6, and I'm sure you all are aware of verse 14, that we henceforth be no more children tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine. Wait, this isn't the right one. No, I'm in the wrong. I'm sorry. Chapter 4. Yeah, you guys know what I'm talking about. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 14. Stand therefore, this is where I want to be, having your loins girt about with truth, and having on the breastplate of righteousness. This is about to get super exciting, and why I kind of quickly went through the rest. We're going to dig a little more into this, because the breastplate of righteousness, I don't know if you guys have ever done a study on that, but that's the Messiah's panoply. It's called the Messiah's panoply, and it's part of the whole armor of God. Let's look at this whole section here in Ephesians chapter 6, and we're going to go back to verse 10 and get a little deeper comparison here with what I was reading in Thessalonians. In verse 10, it says, finally, brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore, take unto you the whole armor of God. Second time that's being said, the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to withstand. So now we're standing and withstanding in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. Stand, therefore. This is the fourth time. Stand, withstand, stand, stand. Stand, therefore, having your loins girt about with truth, and having on the breastplate of righteousness, and your feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Above all, taking the shield of faith, wherewith ye shall be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked. And take the helmet of salvation, and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, praying always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit, and watching thereunto with all perseverance and supplication for all saints. Wow, is this loaded with goodies. I got to tell you, first of all, we're talking about being watchful, being sober, fruitful, faithful, and wise stewards. Being satiated with food and gladness, we read back in Thessalonians. But here in verse 10, the putting on in verse 10. Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the glory of his might. Put on the whole armor in verse 11. That is a perpetual putting on, because the days are evil. You don't just put it on once. You continue every day. You wake up, you put it on. It's perpetual because the days are evil. And it's saying right in the beginning here, be strong in the Lord. We are empowered in the Lord. And that's that word in, it's en that I had read to you before. So in that space, in that place, in that influence, be empowered. How do we do that? With the whole armor, the panoply of God. Putting on is a form of preparing. So you prepare for whatever the season is. And here's how we do that. And then it says in verses 11 through 13, it tells you, put on the whole armor, panoply of God. That's used twice. That ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. I'm going to read to you something in the Merriam-Webster thesaurus about this word panoply. The Greek word is panoplia, that's used 2 times here, but it's panoply. It's actually a synonym of display. It tells you to look at display, the noun, the second noun, display. And this is the definition of that. A striking or spectacular exhibition, array, fanfare, panoply, parade, pomp, shine, show. So it's obviously something that is showing. It's not hidden. Panoply is a display. The whole armor is a display. Now, I'm going to read you something about that panoply of God. In that section where it talks about standing therefore, putting on the whole armor, verses 10 through 16, it is defining the panoply of God. There are 7. 3 are for endowment: the girdle, the breastplate, and the shoes. 2 are weapons of defense: the shield and the helmet. 2 are for offense: the sword and the spear. The breastplate of righteousness is a part of that panoply. It's the Messiah's panoply. And the shield is God himself. I just find it wonderfully fascinating that there's something to cover and protect everything. Everything that we will ever deal with in life, there's something to cover and protect. Every single thing. Fully armed from head to toe, watching over and protecting one's goods, a person is able to be at peace. Like in Luke. I feel like I missed a page here. Oh, yes. Okay. So what and how to do? We talked about putting on the breastplate and the breastplate of righteousness. So again here in verse 14, the breast in the Bible is the seat of feeling, passion, and thought. I already read to you about heart, the importance of heart, obviously. So naturally, if you think about armor, it would protect all these vital parts of who we are, especially our righteousness, the Messiah's panoply. It would protect everything in every season of our life that we go through. in Luke 11:21 through 22. I'm not going to go there, but the person has peace. You watch out, you watchful. I don't even know how many times now. I lost track of how many times it said watch and stand. I'm going to give you some things to look up yourself because I don't have time to get into that. But where it talks about power here in Ephesians, the word kratos, you can look up Acts 24:25 for some other places for that. Galatians 5:23, 2 Peter 1:6. And for iskus, the might, it talks about power and might, Mark 12:30. And that is physical strength by endowment as exerted. Like I said, you guys can look those up if you'd like to. But as far as the Messiah's panoply, I recommend that you read on your own time Isaiah chapter 11, where it really talks about that. I think that's a pretty fascinating record as well. So now we're going to go back to Thessalonians, like I said we were going to wrap it up here. Go back to Thessalonians chapter 5. And I'm going to read to you verses 1, 2, and 6 through 8. 1 Thessalonians 5. But of the times and the seasons, panoply, just in another light now that we've dug a little deeper. Brethren, ye have no need that I write unto you, for yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. So be watchful. Always, just be watchful. Keep an eye out. Verses 6 through 8. Therefore let us not sleep as do others, but let us watch and be sober. For they that sleep, sleep in the night, and they that be drunken, drunken in the night. But let us who are of the day be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love. And I talked to you about the putting on. It's a perpetual putting on of faith and love. And for an helmet, the hope of salvation. You know, talking about being watchful, it's interesting because Charlie and I had gone to a seminar the other day. And in part of that, the gentleman talked about how important it is in our day and time, or any day and time in this season of life, to be watchful, to be just pay attention to what's going on around you. Just be watchful. And it's important. I mean, we're encouraged so much in the word here to be watchful. And we do this by putting on that breastplate as well, part of God's panoply. Let's look at verse 8 here again. But let us who are of the day be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love. That faith is pistis, the living, divinely implanted principle that connects itself. Having persuaded ourselves of something, we have faith, correct? The love is agape. And in the critical Greek lexicon, page 362. Oh, my marker fell out. Page 362. Gotta tell you, obviously I had been working on preparing this teaching back when I was originally going to teach it last month. And then it was interesting in, I don't know if any of you guys have, but when we got the 3 sessions of the Hope that are posted on Oikias now, we listened to the first 2 together. And as I was hearing so many different things he was saying, I'm like, oh my gosh, that's in my teaching. Oh my gosh, that's in my teaching. And then I had heard some other things that we have been listening to. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's in my teaching. So it's just really interesting how, the same God worketh all in all. But here in on page 362 here, oh yeah, I already read to you the heart. I don't need to read that again. So I already read I already went ahead and read that to you. But, you know, our heart, anything that is worth putting on is going to be protecting vital parts of our life, vital parts of our being, whether it's figurative or literal or spiritual. You know, the putting on of the whole armor of God is something that is involved in every part of our life, our body, our heart, our being, what makes us us, what helps us to stand and make a show of, you know, that we are righteous, that we are God's people, the panoply of God. I know there was a lot involved in this, and I tried to cut out as much as I could so that it didn't seem real choppy, but I feel like I covered the most vital parts of it. But what I want to close with, this word kairos, is just a literal translation of everything we've covered that I came up with. Live every day being watchful and sober, giving attention to what season you are experiencing, knowing the panoply of God has you covered from head to toe, no matter the season or portion of time in God's purpose. Be faithful as a servant in God's house, remembering there are seasons to sow and seasons to reap, with definite fruit-bearing portions of time that fill up, satiate our hearts with food and good cheer to the point of medical wellness and satisfaction. As you perpetually put on God's panoply, standing empowered and with peace, knowing you are prepared for anything and that nothing can thwart his purposes or the season he has set. Be and remain within the place, the space, the sphere of influence of faith, walking wise and prudent, embracing the kairos you're in with joy in your heart. And that's what I had to share.